Commander Kim Soo-jin rubbed her tired eyes and reached for her third cup of coffee. The deep space monitoring station felt colder tonight, or maybe it was just the emptiness outside that made her shiver. 3 months of watching endless static had worn her patience thin, but someone had to monitor the void. Between galaxies, the screens flickered with their usual cosmic noise when something different caught her attention. A pattern emerged from the chaos, regular and structured in a way that made her heart skip. She leaned forward, adjusting the array's sensitivity with practiced fingers. "Lieutenant Park Jin-woo, come look at this," she called across the cramped control room. Jin-woo rolled his chair over, still clutching his dinner rations. His eyes widened as he saw the wave patterns dancing across her display. "What am I looking at, Commander?" "I'm not sure, but it's not natural." Soo-jin isolated the signal and fed it through the audio processors. What emerged from the speakers made both officers freeze in their seats. Music filled the station. Not human music, but something that spoke to parts of their souls they didn't know existed. The melody was haunting and beautiful, carrying emotions that had no names in any Earth language. Jin-woo's hands trembled as he traced the signal's origin. "Commander, this is impossible. The source coordinates are coming from outside our galaxy cluster. Nothing should be able to transmit across that distance with this clarity." Soo-jin felt goosebumps rise on her arms as the alien song continued. There was something desperate in its beauty, like a dying bird singing its last notes. She activated the station's emergency protocols and called for Dr. Lee Hae-won. The xenolinguist arrived within minutes, her gray hair messy from sleep. But when she heard the transmission, all traces of tiredness vanished from her face. She dove into her workstation, fingers flying across multiple keyboards as translation programs came online. "This is incredible," Hae-won whispered. "The mathematical patterns are complex, beyond anything we've encountered." Multiple data streams woven into the melody itself.
Hours passed.
As the three humans worked to decode the message, the alien song never stopped, repeating its mournful cycle while Earth's computers struggled to understand its meaning. Jin-woo mapped stellar coordinates embedded in the musical notes. Soo-jin analyzed the transmission strength and frequency patterns. Hae-won pieced together fragments of meaning from the mathematical relationships. "I'm getting partial translations," Hae-won announced, her voice hoarse from hours of concentration. "Words about darkness, silence, ending, and names. ... So many. Names, like they're listing the dead." The breakthrough came near dawn. The station's quantum computers finally cracked the alien language patterns, and the true message began to emerge on their screens. What they read made their blood run cold. The transmission was a desperate plea for help from a civilization calling themselves the Itherney. Their message spoke of worlds falling one by one to something they called the Silence. Not a weapon or an army, but an entity that consumed civilizations by destroying their ability to create, to dream, to sing. It left behind empty worlds populated by living corpses who had forgotten what it meant to be alive. "Look at these coordinates," Jin-woo said, his voice barely a whisper. "They've embedded the locations of hundreds of star systems, all of them marked as fallen or falling." Soo-jin studied the data with growing horror. The pattern showed the silence moving through galaxy after galaxy like a plague, leaving nothing but emptiness in its wake. The Itherney transmission was their final act of defiance, broadcasting their funeral song across impossible distances in the hope that someone, somewhere, would hear and remember them. "There's more," Hae-won said, tears streaming down her face. "They're not just asking to be remembered, they're warning us. The silence feeds on despair and isolation, grows stronger as civilizations fall. And according to their calculations, it's already noticed our galaxy cluster." The alien song continued its mournful cycle, carrying the voices of the dying across the void. Each note was a name, each harmony a world that would soon be silent forever. The Itherney had turned their entire civilization into a living broadcast, spending their last energy to warn others of the approaching darkness. Jin-woo checked the transmission strength readings and paled. "Commander, if they're broadcasting at this power level from 50,000 light-years away, they must be using their entire planet as an antenna. They're burning themselves out just to send this message." Sujin felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. They were the first humans to hear this cry for help, the first to learn of the threat approaching their own corner of the universe. The decision of what to do with this knowledge would fall to others. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Ethernese song would not be ignored. Humanity had always answered the call when someone needed help, no matter how impossible the odds. Even if it meant crossing the void itself. As she prepared to transmit their findings to Earth Command, the alien melody continued to fill the station. Beautiful and terrible in its final, desperate hope. The Great Hall in Geneva had never seen anything like this before. Representatives from every nation on Earth filled the circular chamber, their faces grave as they listened to the alien song that had shaken humanity to its core. The Etherni transmission played softly through the speakers, its haunting melody, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Admiral Choi Min-ho stood at the center podium, his uniform crisp despite the sleepless night since the signal's discovery. Behind him, massive screens displayed star charts showing the impossible distance to the Etherni homeworld. The numbers were staggering even by space exploration standards. "Ladies and gentlemen," Minho began, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, "we face a decision that will define humanity's place in the universe. The coordinates embedded in this transmission place, the Etherni civilization, 50,000 light-years. Dares, beyond our furthest exploration. To put this in perspective, our fastest ships have never traveled more than a few hundred light-years from Earth." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. President Yoon Da-hai of the Pacific Federation raised her hand, her expression skeptical. "Admiral, you're asking us to consider a rescue mission across distances we can barely comprehend? What exactly are you proposing?" Minho gestured to the technical data scrolling beside the star charts. "Our military analysts believe we could retrofit our bomber fleet with experimental faster-than-light technology. It would be dangerous and untested on this scale, but theoretically possible." The chamber erupted in voices. Delegates shouted questions and concerns, while others demanded more details about the proposed mission. President Do-hai banged her gavel repeatedly before order was restored. "Are you seriously suggesting we risk our entire defensive fleet on experimental technology to help aliens we've never met?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. Captain Nam Ho-seok, commander of Earth's 7th Bomber Wing, stood up from his seat in the military section. His weathered face showed the strain of recent days, but his voice was steady and clear. "With respect, Madam President, I'm suggesting we do what humans have always done throughout history. When someone calls for help, we answer. When someone is drowning, we jump in the water to save them, even if we're not sure we can swim that far." A Russian delegate leaned forward. "Captain, this isn't about swimming across a river. This is about crossing impossible distances with technology that might kill our pilots before they even leave the solar system." Ho-seok nodded grimly. "Yes, sir, it is dangerous. But listen to that song playing right now. Those people are dying. Their entire civilization is being destroyed by something they call the silence. If we don't help them, who will?" The debate continued for hours. Some argued that humanity wasn't ready for this kind of interstellar intervention. Others worried about leaving Earth defenseless if the mission failed. The African Union representative stood to speak about resources needed for the retrofit project. The European delegate questioned whether they had the right to make such a decision for all humanity. But through it all, the Etherni song continued to play, its desperate beauty affecting everyone in the chamber. Some delegates had tears in their eyes. Others sat with clenched fists, struggling with the weight of the decision. Engineer Kong Myung was called to present the technical details. She approached the podium, carrying a tablet full of complex diagrams and calculations. Her hands shook slightly as she began to explain her radical proposal. The quantum fold drive system would essentially create a bubble around each bomber, allowing it to slip between dimensions and cross vast distances in compressed time, she explained. "We would need to strip out most of the conventional weapons and replace them with the new drive systems and life support equipment for extended space travel." A Chinese representative interrupted. "How many bombers are we talking about, and what are the chances of success?" Myung consulted her tablet. We could retrofit approximately 40 bombers within 6 months. As for success rates, I estimate a 70% chance of reaching the target coordinates. The return journey would depend on what they find there. The implications hung heavy in the air. These pilots might be flying on a one-way mission to help people they had never met. In ships that might not survive the journey, President Dahai called for a short recess, but few delegates left their seats. The weight of the decision seemed to hold everyone in place. Small groups formed as representatives whispered among themselves, trying to find consensus. When the session resumed, the voting process began. Each nation's representative stood to announce their decision. The count was close from the beginning. Some countries voted yes, inspired by humanity's tradition of helping others. Others voted no, concerned about the risks and costs, as the final votes were tallied. The chamber fell completely silent, except for the alien song still playing in the background. The Secretary General stood to announce the results. His voice, barely above a whisper, the motion to approve the Itherney rescue mission passes by a margin of 3 votes. The chamber remained quiet for a long moment as the reality sank in. Humanity had just committed to its most ambitious and dangerous mission ever attempted. They would cross the void itself to answer a cry for help from people they had never seen. Captain Osio closed his eyes and listened to the alien song, knowing that soon he and his pilots would be racing through the darkness to reach its source. The launch from Luna Base was unlike anything in human history. 40 modified bombers sat on the lunar surface, their sleek forms now bulky with experimental quantum-fold drives and massive data storage units. Captain Nam Hosiok walked among his pilots one final time, checking equipment and offering words of encouragement to the brave men and women who had volunteered for this impossible mission. Remember, we're not just carrying weapons, he told them over the CUM system. We're carrying everything that makes us human. Each bomber held compressed quantum storage containing Earth's entire cultural heritage. Music from every nation and time period, literature spanning thousands of years, art, poetry, films, and recordings of human voices speaking words of love, hope, and defiance. If they died on this mission, at least something of humanity would reach the stars. Commander O the Jin powered up her bomber systems and felt the quantum drive hum to life beneath her feet. The sensation was strange, like electricity running through her bones. Around her, the other pilots completed their pre-flight checks, while ground crews made final adjustments to the untested technology. All ships report ready, came the voice of flight control. Begin launch sequence. One by one, the bombers lifted off from Luna Base and formed up in Earth's shadow. Siok looked back at the blue and white marble that was home, wondering if he would ever see it again. Then he gave the order that would send them into the unknown. Activate quantum fold drives. Begin cultural transmission. Reality twisted around the fleet as space-time folded. The bombers slipped between dimensions, racing across impossible distances while broadcasting Earth's cultural treasures ahead of their path. Music, poetry, and human voices spread out through the void like ripples on a cosmic pond. The journey was unlike anything the pilots had experienced. Time moved strangely inside the quantum bubble. Sometimes it felt like minutes had passed, other times like years. But through it all, they continued transmitting humanity's songs into the darkness. Months into their voyage, they began intercepting new Etherney transmissions. These weren't the funeral dirges they had heard before. Dr. Jung Sora, the fleet's xenobiologist, worked frantically to decode the new messages, while the pilots maintained their course. The transmissions are different now, she reported to Hosiok. More complex, more detailed. The Etherney are telling us about the silence. It's not a weapon or a fleet of ships. It's something much worse. The truth was horrifying. The silence was a living entity that fed on creativity and imagination. It didn't kill bodies directly. Instead, it destroyed the part of living beings that made them truly alive, consumed their ability to create music, art, stories, and dreams. What remained were empty shells that looked alive, but had forgotten what it meant to live. It spreads from world to world like a plague, Sora explained. During one of their briefing sessions, once it arrives on a planet, the people gradually lose their capacity for joy, creativity, and hope. Within generations, entire civilizations become walking corpses. Pilot Shin Wubin was monitoring long-range sensors when he made a discovery. That changed everything. His voice cracked with excitement as he called out over the comm system. "Captain, I'm detecting response signals from systems we passed months ago. The dead worlds, ... they're singing again." Hoseok rushed to his own sensor station and confirmed the readings. Star systems that the Etherni had marked as fallen to the silence were now broadcasting their own music and cultural transmissions. Somehow, Earth's songs were having an effect across vast distances. Dr. Sora studied the data with growing amazement. Our cultural transmissions are acting like a cure. Where Earth's music and art are being received, the silence is retreating. People who had lost their creativity for generations are remembering how to sing. The implications were staggering. They weren't just racing to rescue the Etherni. They were carrying a weapon that could fight the silence itself. It's not a weapon of destruction, but one of creation and hope, as they drew closer to the war zone. More dead worlds began to respond. Ancient civilizations that had been silent for millennia started broadcasting their own cultural treasures again. The void filled with a growing chorus of voices, each adding their unique song to the growing symphony. Commander Othajan watched her instruments as they detected hundreds of new transmissions. "It's like watching the galaxy wake up," she whispered. But the silence was also responding to their approach. Long-range sensors detected something massive moving between the stars, a darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. It was coming to investigate the source of the disruption, and it was angry. Hoseok realized they were flying into more than just a rescue mission. They were carrying humanity's soul across the stars, and that soul was powerful enough to bring the dead back to life. But it had also attracted the attention of something that wanted to destroy everything that made life worth living. "All ships prepare for combat," he ordered. "We're about to find out if human creativity is stronger than cosmic despair." Behind them, a trail of awakened worlds sang their defiance into the void. Ahead of them, the silence waited in the darkness, between the stars, ready to defend its empire of emptiness against the songs of Earth. The final battle for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin. The bomber fleet from Earth moved through space like dark metal birds. Commander Kim Yuna sat in her command chair, watching the stars grow dim ahead of them. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her heart beat fast. They'd traveled so far to reach this place. "Commander, we're getting close," said her communications. "Officer." The young man's voice was tight with fear. Through the viewing screens, they could see something that made everyone on the ship go quiet. Dead worlds floated in the darkness. Hundreds of them. Some were covered in ice. Others were burning. But most were just empty and gray, like someone had sucked all the life out of them. Cities stood like broken teeth on the surface of these planets. No lights, no movement, nothing. Kim Yuna had seen war before, but this was different. This was worse than war. This was like someone had reached into these worlds and stolen their souls. "There," pointed the radar officer. "Ships ahead. They're still fighting." Through the space between dead worlds, Kim Yuna could see them. Strange. Ships that looked like they were made of crystal and light. They moved in patterns that seemed like dancing, but they were dancing with death. Dark shapes surrounded them, shapes that hurt to look at. The darkness seemed to eat the stars around it. "Those must be the Etherni," Kim Yuna said. She had read the reports. The aliens who had sent the song to Earth, the ones who were fighting alone against something called the silence. The silence was not just dark. It was the opposite of everything good. It did not kill bodies. It killed the part of living things that made them want to live. It took away hope and love and the desire to create beautiful things. It left empty shells walking around, forgetting what it meant to be alive. Kim Yuna opened the communication channel. Her voice went out across space to the crystal ships. "This is Commander Kim Yuna of Earth. We heard your song. We came to help." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reply came back. It was not in words, but Kim Yuna understood it anyway. It was the sound of someone crying with happiness. The Etherny had been fighting alone for thousands of years. They had watched species after species fall to the silence. They had almost given up hope. The dark shapes in space began to move toward the human ships. Kim Yuna could feel something trying to get into her mind. It was cold and empty, and it whispered that there was no point in fighting. That nothing mattered, that it would be easier to just give up. But Kim Yuna remembered Earth. She remembered the sound of rain on windows and the smell of her mother's cooking. She remembered music and laughter and the way people looked when they fell in. Love. The silence could not take that away. Captain Nam Hoseok, she called to the bomber captain. Are your ships ready? Nam Hoseok's voice came back strong and sure. Ready, Commander. All bombers in position. Kim Yuna took a deep breath. Deploy resonance bombs. All frequencies. Show them what it means to be alive. The bomber ships opened their bellies like flowers blooming. But instead of bombs that destroyed, they released something else. Broadcasting devices. Each one was loaded with everything beautiful that humans had ever made. Music poured out into space. Not just one song, but thousands. Rock music and classical. Music and folk songs from every country on Earth. The lullabies that mothers sang to their babies. The songs that workers sang to make hard jobs easier. The music that played at weddings and festivals. Stories came next. Tales of heroes and lovers. And ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories about hope and courage and never giving up, even when everything seemed lost. Art flowed through space like rivers of light. Paintings and sculptures and photographs. Pictures of sunsets and newborn animals and people hugging each other. Images that showed the beauty of being alive. The silence screamed. For the first time in thousands of years, it pulled back. The darkness began to break apart like smoke in a strong wind. On the dead worlds below, something amazing happened. People who had been walking around like empty shells suddenly stopped. They looked up at the sky. They remembered who they used to be. A woman on a frozen planet began to hum a tune she had forgotten. A man on a desert world picked up a piece of colored stone and remembered that he used to make art. Children, who had not spoken in years, opened their mouths and began to sing. The Etherny ships glowed brighter. The crystal holes rang like bells. They had not heard such beautiful sounds in so long. They'd almost forgotten that life could be more than just surviving. Kim Yuna watched as the darkness retreated further into space. The stars seemed brighter now. The dead worlds were still broken, but they were not empty anymore. Life was returning to them, one song at a time. This is just the beginning, she said into her communicator. We're going to teach the silence, something it never learned. We're going to show it what happens when living things refuse to give up on beauty. The battle for the galaxy's soul had begun, and for the first time in millennia. The forces of life were winning. Commander O the Jin gripped the controls of her bomber as it flew through space. Around her, hundreds of other Earth ships moved in a perfect circle. They were protecting the last worlds that still had life in them, but these were not ordinary bombers anymore. Each ship had become something special, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. Through her cockpit window, O the Jin could see the other ships glowing with soft light. Music and stories and pictures flowed from each one like water from a fountain. The ships had become carriers of everything beautiful that humans had ever created. They were weapons, but weapons that built instead of destroyed. Commander, her radio officer said, his voice shaking. It's coming. O the Jin looked ahead and saw the silence approaching. It was bigger than she had imagined. It stretched across space like a massive storm cloud made of darkness. But this darkness was alive and hungry. It had eaten the hope and joy from hundreds of worlds. It had turned whole civilizations into walking empty shells. The silence moved toward them like a slow wave of death. Oh, the Jinn could feel it trying to get into her mind. It whispered to her that nothing mattered, that all the music and art and stories were just noise. It would be better to stop fighting and let the emptiness take over. But oh, the Jinn remembered. Her daughter back on Earth. She remembered the little girl singing while she played with her toys. She remembered her husband cooking dinner and humming a tune he had made up. She remembered the sound of laughter and the feel of warm sunlight on her face. All bombers, maintain transmission, came Captain Nam, Hosiok's voice over the radio. Let the universe hear us. The Earth ships opened their signals wider. Music poured out into space in all directions. It's not just human music, but now they were joined by other voices. The crystal ships of the Etherny sang their ancient songs. From the protected worlds came the voices of dozens of different species, each adding their own sounds to the growing chorus. A lizard-like race contributed their drumming ceremonies. A species that looked like walking trees shared their wind songs. Flying creatures from a world of floating islands added their calling songs. Even small creatures that lived in the deep ocean of a distant planet somehow found a way to join the song. Oh, the Jinn watched in amazement as the silence began to change. The darkness that had been solid and hungry started to break apart. But it was not disappearing. Something else was happening. As millions of voices from hundreds of worlds sang together, the silence began to transform. The entity that had fed on loneliness and despair found itself surrounded by connection and joy. For the first time in its existence, it experienced what it felt like when living beings reached out to each other across the emptiness of space. The change was slow at first. Parts of the darkness began to shimmer like water, and those parts started to glow with a soft light. The light spread through the silence like dawn breaking over a dark world. Othagin realized what was happening. The silence was not dying. It was becoming something new. All those years of eating emptiness and despair had left it hollow inside. But now, filled with the songs and stories of living worlds, it was learning what it meant to connect rather than consume. The transformation spread faster now. The massive dark entity began to stretch out in new directions, but not to attack. It was reaching toward distant stars, toward worlds that had been cut off from each other by the vast emptiness of space. Look at that, whispered the Jinns. Radio officer, the silence had become a bridge, living connection between distant worlds. Species that had been separated by millions of miles of empty space could now share their songs and stories with each other instantly. The entity that had once devoured civilizations had become the carrier wave that united them. From her cockpit, Othagin could hear it all. The drum ceremonies of the lizard people mixed with the wind songs of the tree beings, the crystal music of the Etherny harmonized with the deep ocean calls of the water creatures. And through it all, the music of Earth played like a golden thread, connecting everything together. Captain Nam Hosiok's voice came over the radio, full of wonder. All ships, prepare for a return journey to Earth. Our mission here is complete. As the Earth bombers began their long trip home, Othagin looked back at the starfield. It was alive now in a way it had never been before. Lights flickered between distant stars as worlds shared their cultures with each other. Songs traveled across impossible distances. Art and stories flowed from planet to planet like rivers of light. The Etherny sent them a farewell message, not in words but in pure emotion. Gratitude and joy and hope filled the communication channels. Other species added their own thanks. The galaxy had learned to sing together. It would never be silent again. Captain Hosiok's final message went out to all the connected worlds. This is Earth, heading home. Keep singing, keep sharing, keep being alive. The Jinn smiled as her ship turned toward the distant yellow star where Earth waited. Humanity had found its place in the cosmos not as conquerors or destroyers, but as the species that had taught the universe how to sing. They were going home to a galaxy that would never be lonely again.